Shalom. We are now starting these weeks with the reading of the fifth book of the Torah, Sefer Devarim, called also Deuteronomy. And I'd like to start with an explanation concerning the very first word. The beginning of the book Devarim, Deuteronomy, created a big drama. How come? Well, let us remember, the first book of the Torah is Genesis. The story begins. The second book, Exodus, begins with the word, and these are the names. It begins with the word and. The word and in Hebrew is just one letter, Vav, Ve'ele Shmot. The third book of the Torah, Vayikra, begins with the Vav, Vayikra, and he called upon Moses, meaning the Lord called upon Moses. But the third book begins with the word and, Ve, Va. The fourth book of the Torah, Bamidbar, actually meaning in the desert, but is called Numbers because a few times the numbers of the Israelites were counted in the desert. It begins also with the word and, Vav. So what is the meaning? The meaning is that each of the books, Exodus, Leviticus, Vayikra, and Numbers, Bamidbar, are the continuation of the first book, Bereshit, Genesis. So actually, we would expect that the book Devarim, the fifth book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, should also begin with an end, with Vav, in order to make it clear that the fifth book belongs as well to the Torah. What do we see? The word and, the Vav, is missing. And the great sages and scholars and rabbis of the people of Israel, now for 2,500 years, are discussing and debating the deep meaning of this missing word and at the beginning of the word of the book Devarim, Deuteronomy. Why? Why is it a drama? Think about it. If the general rule is right, and it is a rule, that you need the word and in order to make clear that something, some text, is the clear continuation of the text before. In other words, if the word and is missing, then it means something new begins. If it is a separated text, it may be something totally different. It may even be, in some cases, a replacement of the first text. That would be a big problem. So let us see what happens with the fifth book of the Torah. Why is there a centuries-long debate? If the book Devarim, Deuteronomy, begins with, "These be the words which Moses spoke unto all Israel on this side of the Jordan," I refrain today from discussing the rest of this very famous first sentence. It is another subject. Our concern is, why does the fifth book of the Torah begin without the word and, without a Hebrew Vav, And what is the deep meaning and what are the implications of this missing word? Well, those who started to argue it would be horrible if the fifth book would be considered to be a separate book not belonging to the Torah, because from all our traditions and from all other explanations and from the content of the book Devarim, Deuteronomy, we very well know that it belongs to the Torah. So we find comfort, say the sages, in verse 5. In verse 5, we read that on the other side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, did Moses explain this Torah as follows. In other words, it became clear that there was an optional problem. It could be a problem if people would consider the fifth book not to be a part of the Torah. So the fifth verse solves this dilemma by saying it is Moses in this book who explains to the people of Israel on this side of the Jordan the Torah, explaining the meaning of it, telling the teachings of it. Please remember, this fifth book of the Torah, Devarim, Deuteronomy, is the summary of speeches and explanations spoken by Moses in the last 4 weeks before the children of Israel went across the Jordan into the land of Israel. That means the whole book of Deuteronomy is actually a collection of speeches spoken by Moses in the last 4 weeks of the 40 years since the Exodus from Egypt. What do we learn from all this? Well, very often, if we read the Torah and we learn one sentence, we draw a conclusion. We draw a lesson. We learn from it something that can serve as a good tool of better understanding other sentences, other verses, other chapters of the Torah. Today, we have learned that the missing letter Vav, the missing word and, at the beginning of the fifth book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, raised the serious question, does the fifth book of the Bible belong to the complex of the 5 books of the Torah? The missing word and, making it a continuation of the books before, rose the discussion, triggered this discussion, but in order to solve it, one has to read just 4 sentences more, and in the 5th verse of the first chapter of the book Deuteronomy, Devarim, one can read, there is no doubt about it, that it belongs to the Torah. It is Moses who explains to the children of Israel this very Torah, this very teaching of a God which was given to the people of Israel. Allow me to add to this a short personal story to tell you how much we can learn from Torah learning also for very political matters of today. Some years ago, some 25 years ago, 20 years ago, I was traveling in Israel together with a German very important politician. He was at that time the prime minister of a German federate state. His name was Johannes Rau. He later became the German president, the president of Germany. Since 1964, he came to Israel every year to visit the Holy Land. His father was a priest. He was a Christian believer. He was Christian by faith. He was a social democrat politician, but deeply rooted in his faith in the Bible. He knew the Bible very well. And since 1964, he came to Israel at least once a year, every year. So he knew Israel quite well. In 1995, I escorted him and a delegation he brought with him to Israel, and we went to Jerusalem. With a minibus, some 15 people, we went to Jerusalem, drove the highway up to Jerusalem. Today it is a highway. In previous times it was a very narrow road. And I asked Rao to please have a look at the two sides of the highway. On one side, it was the southern side. He saw many pine trees. And I told him proudly, these are trees that we have planted in the last decades on this side of the road. So obviously, Rao asked, how come you didn't plant trees on the northern side of this very same highway? And I reminded him that the northern side of the highway to Jerusalem used to be under Jordanian government control since 1949 until June 1967, until this famous Six-Day War, when Israel was bombarded by Jordan and had to retaliate. And as a result, it happened to be that Israel conquered Judea and Samaria, including the old city of Jerusalem, an area that is called in the world the West Bank, meaning the West Bank of the Jordan River. So in all these years, during which the Jews in Israel planted trees on one side of the road, the Jordanians did not plant trees on the other side. And the mountains north of the highway were barren mountains. Why? Because for centuries, the shepherds and the nomads who had herds of goats used to travel through this area. And as you know, the goats eat anything green they find. And of course, in previous centuries, people in the area lacked the ecological awareness of the importance of keeping the green surrounding. But the people of Israel did not study ecology at some university in the 20th century. No, the Jewish people is reading the Bible now for 2,000 years, and the Torah for 3,300 years. And from the prophecies of the prophets of the Bible, we know that it is our task, it is our obligation, when the people of Israel return to their land, that they have to contribute to the realization that the fulfillment of the prophecies of the prophets will come true. How? The prophets prophesied that the land of Israel will blossom when their people return to their homeland. So we have to plant trees. And since the beginning of the 20th century, Jews have planted in the land of Israel over 240 million trees by hand. I used to be a member of the great organization, the JNF, KKL, Keren Kayemet LiYisrael, the Afforestation and Land Development Authority of Israel. It was created in the Zionist movement at the beginning of the 20th century, and Theodor Herzl was the one who donated the planting of the first 3 trees, and today we have over 240 million trees that the children of Israel have planted in the country. What is the connection between the trees and the beginning of the book Devarim? I told Johannes Rau, look at the road. You see one side green with a forest planted by man. It is not a natural forest. Look at the other side, the northern side. It is still a barren mountain. We're going to change that too. It will be green in near future. But what do we learn from what we see? We see that the deep meaning of what we see is not only in what we see. I may say, what we see is not merely what we see. There is more to it. So, if you look at the highway, the 2 sides of the highway leading to Jerusalem, you learn not only the color, you learn the cultural difference between the populations who live there. One people used to exploit nature. The other people, the people of Israel, understand that we have an obligation to keep the land and to contribute with a lot of efforts to the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Bible, to let the country blossom again, to contribute to the re-greening of the country. So, by learning the first sentence of the book Devarim, Deuteronomy, realizing that the missing word and, Vav, could possibly mean that the book does not belong to the Torah. Therefore, we read the further verses, come to verse 5, realize, oh yes, very well, the book Devarim, Deuteronomy, does belong to the Torah. It is the explanation which Moses gave to the young generation in the desert after the 40 years in the desert since the Exodus from Egypt. And it was before they crossed the Jordan in order to return to their ancient homeland. Why do I say the ancient homeland? Because Abraham came to the land of Canaan 3,800 years ago. 3,800 years ago. What do we see? In Israel, what you see is not merely what you see with your eyes. Think about the deep meaning of what you see. And when you read in the Bible, what you see is not merely what you see. What we read is not merely what we read. In studying the Bible, it is important to think about what we don't see, what text is probably missing, to think about it, why is it missing, and what is the meaning of it. So today we actually devoted quite a while to discuss not the whole Bible, no, just to discuss one word. And you see, it's very interesting. Studying the Bible, we did discuss one word, but actually not a word that we did read in the Bible. No, we devoted the whole discussion to a word that does not even exist in the beginning of the text. The word is missing, and even by missing, it does teach us a lot. I wish you good health and a lot of joy in reading and learning the Bible and the Torah. Shalom from Israel, and I wish you all the best.